All right, on page 10 in our book, Why Do People Not See the Bible Alike? In the middle of the page, the big paragraph right near the top, that starts near the top, is where we closed out last week in talking about the matter of unity and the difficulties that are present in our current society with regard to the idea of unity. And Brother Stroop makes the point that many have attempted to create unity when in fact they are not creating unity, but they are creating union. And there is a difference between union and unity. And for example, Brother G.K. Wallace back in the early 70s was talking about that there was at that time the onset of the unity movement that manifested itself in the 80s, where members of the churches of Christ and the Christian church got together, and they had these unity meetings all over the country, and to show that we're still unified, we're still brethren. And by the way, I still believe, I believe those are our brethren. I believe the independent Christian church teaches. They teach the plan of salvation just like we teach it. The problem is they've erred on instrumental music and Bible authority. They've erred on women's leadership and other things, like some of our brethren who wear the name Church of Christ on their door have done. And so I believe they're our brethren. The problem is that they have always accused us of being the source of division, when it was in fact they that were the source of division when they introduced the instrument into the worship, and faithful brethren refused to accept it. And these unity meetings began to build, and one thing that was common in all of them was that there was never any admission of error on the independent part of the independent Christian church. In fact, everything that was ever said and done was a capitulation by faithful brethren, apologizing for causing division over the instrument. In other words, it's all our fault for continuing to do what the church has been doing for 2,000 years. It's all our fault. And that's the way this went. Well, there was really no real unity involved. It was more of union. In other words, we'll just kind of decide that we're going to ignore our differences and say that we're unified. And Brother Wallace illustrated the difference between union and unity. He said you can take two cats and tie their tails together and hang them over a clothesline. And said you'll have union, but you won't have unity. And that was a great illustration, because you can just picture that in your mind. Yeah, they're together. There's union, but there's not unity. And so, that's a great illustration of the difference between union and unity. And last week, I made specific mention. This is why I'm kind of backtracking just a hair. I made specific mention of a lot of what are called so-called unity movements. Back when I first came here in the mid-90s, there was a thing going around called the March for Jesus. The March for Jesus, where people from all religious stripes would get together, and they'd have a big pole with a banner on it, and they just march down Main Street. March for Jesus. We're all united. Haskell Sparks was the only person who had any connection to the Churches of Christ, and he got involved in that. Of course, it ended up being his downfall among the brethren. A lot of us were suspicious of him to begin with, but I still have a picture of the Moulton newspaper with Haskell Sparks helping somebody tote that March for Jesus sign down the streets of Moulton, and it just an image burned in my mind. And we made note of there's at the high school the "See You at the Pole." The flag pole, where about once a year they have some kind of prayer session at the flag pole. And then there's the National Day of Prayer, which usually takes place at some city hall somewhere. And where people from all different religious stripes come together and they pray. And, they pray for the country, and they pray for their community, and they pray for all these things. And it's supposed to be a show of unity. But there's really no unity at all. because we know that on the following Sunday they'll be just as divided. They'll be just as divided as they ever were. And the only way to achieve unity is to have unity of thought, unity of purpose, unity of practice. There is no unity aside from those things. And the reason I mention that is I mentioned the National Day of Prayer, and this goes with my sermon this morning about virtue and what virtue is, what constitutes virtue. And a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who is not a member of the church, well known in our community, in the last 2 years has contacted me about the National Day of Prayer and asked me if I would participate. Well, as things would have it, I had obligations on those days and told him I couldn't make it. And now this year he's contacted me again. I haven't had a chance to talk to him. I'm going to talk to him tomorrow. But as I was studying the matter of virtue, and what virtue is all about, I realized I had not been very virtuous in how I've handled this matter. And I know a lot of other brethren have struggled with this same thing. Now, the real reason I'm not going to the National Day of Prayer is not because I'm busy. Because this time I'm not busy. I don't have anything on my schedule for that day. So I can't take the coward's way out and say I can't make it because I have a previous engagement. I'm going to have to finally just talk to him and explain to him that I can't participate in it. And like I said, I've not been virtuous in the sense that I've not just taken the time to talk to him about it and explain to him why I not only can't but won't participate. And and for whatever reasons, I have no idea how he's going to react to this when I talk to him about it tomorrow. I hope that he'll be understanding. But the truth of the matter is that I'm going to have to tell him that I don't believe we're all on the same page. And that's the truth, and that's why I don't participate. You're not going to see me standing up there, holding hands with somebody from the ramp, or Preston Hedrick, or anybody else for that matter, as if we're all of the like mind, and we're all, as old saying, we're all going to heaven. We're just taking different roads. There's not one shred of Bible teaching that even remotely says you can get to heaven on different roads. When I got ready to go to Mom's house last night from Birmingham, or one time even last week, looking at alternate routes to get to Jacksonville, I typed in my end location, and based on my current location, I had options. I could go to Birmingham and go to Jacksonville like I normally do, but I didn't want to drive through Birmingham at rush hour. Or if there was something out on the east end of town, I could have went up 59 and went across at Gadsden. Or I could have just done what I did, which is turn left out of this parking lot and just hammer down to Coleman all the way over to Gadsden and go through Sneed and go that way. But you can get to Jacksonville from here about 3 different ways, and there's not a nickel's worth of difference in any of them time-wise. All right? But you can't get to heaven that way. There's not 3 ways to get to heaven. There's not even 2 ways to get to heaven. There's only one way to get to heaven, and that is through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And through the obedience to that gospel, one contacts the blood of Jesus Christ. And so I'm going to have to practice some biblical virtue tomorrow, because I haven't been as forthcoming as I ought to be, and I realize that. Now, sometimes it amazes me how the Lord gets a hold of my attention. What are the odds that last week I spoke about this very matter, National Day of Prayer, and within 3 days I get an invitation to go to the National Day of Prayer. At the same time, I'm preparing a sermon on what it means to be truly virtuous. It's a miracle. Walter?
Well, they ain't two roads anyway.
That's right. But I believe in the providence of God, and I believe, and I'm praying. I really am, and I want y'all to pray the same. At some point, pray that conversation goes well tomorrow. Pray that I'll have an opportunity to say what is right, and maybe open a door. Because this person's my friend, and I'd love for them to go to heaven. And maybe that and this is, and I've thought about talking to this person for a long time. Maybe this is my opportunity. Maybe this is my opportunity. So I'm gonna be praying about it, and I want y'all to pray about it. But the idea of ignoring differences and calling it unity is just not biblical. It's just not biblical. And so I wanted to kind of share that with you and let y'all be thinking about it and praying about it. Now, at the bottom of page 10, there's the note about the differences in the number of religious institutions in the United States. In 1906, after the census, religious census, there were 191 separate religious bodies in the United States. 191. All right? But 10 years later, there were 202. And 10 years later after that, there was 212. And 10 years later than that, or 215. And 10 years after that, there were 256. And now there's over 300 distinct religious institutions in the United States. Now, if you were to do an online survey or a search, you'd find that there's about 25,000. Now, let me tell you where that number, why this number is so different than that number. The actual number is in the 300s, all right? But a lot of times, the current census or the current estimates take into account every single independent community church as being a religious institution. That has no formal, it has no formal ties to an established denomination. Does that make sense? So there are about 300 or 400 distinct denominational groups. And that would include all stripes of Baptists. And there's 30 or 40. There's 30 or 40 different Baptists. There's Northern and Southern and Free Will and Missionary and General. And there's just Landmark and Bible. There's just a lot of different ones. And they're all distinct from one another. There's several Presbyterian groups. There's several Methodist groups. There's several Church of God groups. There's several different Pentecostal groups. And then there are all these independent groups that are not directly tied to anybody in particular. Now, as a general rule, I'm speaking generally, okay? As a general rule, any unaffiliated group is going to be essentially one of two groups. It's going to be a Baptist church without the Baptist name, or it's going to be the Church of God without the Church of God name. Now there are going to be some exceptions to that, but out of 25,000 independent groups, the vast majority of them are basically either going to be a Baptist church or what I would call a semi-charismatic type church. Now there are some. I found one in Pahrump, Nevada, when I was out there 3 years ago. That was very, very close to the Lord's church. And I reached out to the preacher to try to talk to him while I was out there, and he didn't get back to me until after I was already, back in this part of the country. And I hope maybe to make contact with him in a year or two if I'm able to go back out there. But they teach very closely. They're an independent group, and they teach very closely to what the Bible teaches on church organization, plan of salvation. If I could quote Jesus, I'd say, "Thou art not far from the kingdom of God." Just need just a little push in the right direction. And so, there are a lot of different independent groups, but there are about 300 denominational groups. Now, in the mind of any discerning individual, that would be problematic. If a person said, I want to go to church, but I look in the local paper on Saturday and I see, attend the church or synagogue nearest you. And I see all these churches, and they're all divided by, there's a line of Baptists, and there's a line that says Church of Christ, there's a line that says Methodist, and there's a line that says church. How confusing would that be to somebody? To somebody who decided they wanted to go to church somewhere, but didn't know where to start. That's one thing that's so important for us. And I was at PTP Spark last week in Jacksonville, and man, I heard some great preaching last week. And I believe it was David Shannon, a guy I went to Freed Hardeman with. He's now the president of Freed Hardeman University. And he was talking about how important it was for Christians to practice their Christianity on a daily basis, even in the face of rejection, repeated rejection. And he gave this account. That there was a guy. There was a guy and he married and had, I think they had 3 children. And at some point in time, the mother was at home with the children, and her 4-year-old let loose with a string of curse words. And it kind of took her back. And she said, she made up her mind right then. I'm not going to have my kids raised like this. Something's got to change. And she made up her mind right then she was going to go to church on Sunday. Well, the first thing happened when her husband got home from work that week. She said, we're going to church Sunday. Told what happened, said this is not right. Our kids are not going to be raised like this. I'm not going to have heathens like that. We're going to church. Either you can go with me or not, but me and the kids are going to church Sunday. So the husband said, fine. And then what was the next question? Where are you going to go? Where are we going to go? And the mother said, I don't know. And here's his response. He said, there's 2 guys that I work with that every year invite me to their Friends' Day. They go to the same church. And every year they invite me to go to their Friends' Day. And I've never taken them up on it. He said, and those guys, he goes, those guys are good guys. He goes, they live what they profess. They live what they profess. He says, we're going to go there. There was 2 guys that were members of the Lord's church. And if I recall correctly, down the road, the parents obeyed the gospel, and all the kids grew up and obeyed the gospel. And so, it shows the need for us to be consistent in our thinking and in our practice, about how we deal with people, because you never know. For years and years, that guy wasn't interested. But then when he was interested, at least he had some background. He had some background to make a good first decision. I'm going to tell this on Johnny's stepdad, Don. Don got bad sick back in the early 2000s, and Billy Hudson, we just finished our Fishers of Men program, and Billy Hudson taught Don the gospel. And Big Boy and I baptized Don. Had to wrap his legs in garbage bags and tie them off because he couldn't get his legs wet because he was diabetic. And we helped him up. It took both of us to do it. Don was a big man, and had to help him up the stairs and baptized him into Christ. And he died 10 days later. But after he'd obeyed the gospel, Billy went back, and he said, Don, I'm sorry. He said, I'm sorry. I never talked to you about the gospel before. And Don's reply was, Billy, he said, don't lose any sleep over it. He says, because if you'd have come any time before, I wouldn't have been interested. There's a lot of truth in that. But when the time came when he got interested, there was Billy Hudson. He was there. And so, we want to be the people that will be there. To help people that can't make up their mind about religion because they look out across the religious landscape and all they see is division and confusion and contradiction, and that's not what we want to be about. We want to point people in the right direction. We want people to see our light shining, so that we can help them in those ways. Now, getting back to the primary subject about this division, Stroop does an incredible job of showing us that a lot of what we treat as problems are simply only symptoms of problems. And on page 11, he makes note that there was a time when they treated high blood pressure by taking some of your blood out. And it worked. Temporarily, it worked. Problem was, all they were doing was treating a symptom, and they weren't treating the problem behind the symptom. I can remember when Wade, he was making too much blood, and until they could find out the source of the problem, Wade had to go get blood taken out on a regular basis to get him under control until they could find the source of the problem. Now, they weren't doing that as a treatment for the problem. They were doing it to try to find as a stopgap in order to find the source of the problem. And so, a lot of times we take the symptom of religious division and we treat it as if religious division is the problem. And religious division is not the problem. Religious division is a symptom of a problem. It's just like when somebody runs a high fever. It talks about high fever on page 11. Somebody's running 104 fever. You might put them in an ice bath and you might bring their temperature down. But you understand that you're only treating a symptom until you can deal with the problem. You can't live in an ice bath. To keep your fever down. If you have a disease, it's going to kill you unless you deal with the problem. All right? Now over to page 12. In that first top paragraph, he says, halfway down, beginning with the word likewise, says, the multiplicity of divisions among religious people is merely a symptom of a deeper cause, which is sapping the energies and deforming the actions of many so-called Christian people. As long as efforts are directed primarily at removing the symptom, the results are likely to prove disappointing. Religious division is not the problem. It's a problem, but it's not the problem. It's a symptom of a problem. Denominationalism is not a problem, or is a problem, but it's not the source of a problem. It is a symptom of a problem. And then he notes this, and he talks about in the next paragraph that another problem exists, that when there are divisions within local individual groups, bodies, within local churches even. First of all, there are divisions. I'll give you an example. There are divisions even within established denominational bodies. Right? The easiest one for me there are two. One is that there is a tremendous division in mainstream American denominations and African denominations of the same name. All right? When the Episcopal Church decided they were going to accept homosexuality and ordain homosexuals, the Africans said, we won't have it. We won't have it. Now, they all still wear the same name, but Africa's not going that route. Africa is not going that route. All right? I'll give you one even closer to home. In the Southern Baptist denomination, the majority of the guys that are coming through Southern Baptist seminaries are hardcore Calvinists. 5-point Calvinists, just like we studied on Sunday night about a year ago. total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints, and once saved, always saved. All right? However, about 85% of Baptist membership, Southern Baptist membership, is not hardcore Calvinist. You ask most of your Southern Baptist friends if they believe that a child is born as a sinner. And they'll say, well, no, that's foolish. But the chances are their preacher believes that. But he won't preach it because he knows 85% of the members won't accept that. And so there is a division even among this denomination in regard to, are we going to be 5-point Calvinists? Or are we going to be 3-point Calvinists? Some are tulips, T-U-L-I-P, tulips, and some of them are just lips. In other words, they don't buy the total depravity and the unconditional election part, the predestination part. And so even within religious institutions, there are differences of thought. Go back last year before when the Methodists had their convention about what they were going to do with homosexuality. They couldn't even agree to have a vote. They had to vote about having a vote, and the vote to have a vote didn't pass. Half of them wanted to vote on the matter, half of them didn't want to vote on the matter. So they couldn't even get a vote to have a vote. Because you have people who are of different thinking, even within religious institutions. Then you go even inside the churches of Christ. Are there differences among people in the churches of Christ? Sure, there are. I wouldn't be so foolish as to say that everybody in this room believes everything that I believe. I would never presume that. So there are even differences, not even among the churches of Christ. There are differences even within local congregations. Now, what we have to figure out is, are these differences based on matters that the Bible has spoken clearly about, or is it matter that the Bible has left us some matter of conscience? Because the Bible has left some things as a matter of conscience. And the reason I want to mention that is, at the bottom of page 12 and the top of page 13, Stroop, and by the way, he's going to come back to this same subject on pages 18 and 19. And his problem is that he's talking about the matter of what he calls carnal warfare. What he means is pacifism or otherwise. Now, when you figure that he wrote this book in 1949, 4 years after the end of World War II, this was a problem for the church. All right? If you go back 80 years before that, and you get, or 90, and you get to the Civil War, you'll find that David Lipscomb in his writings during and after the Civil War was also concerned about the matter of carnal warfare, because he saw Christians on the north trying to kill Christians in the south, and Christians in the south trying to kill Christians in the north. And so you can see why men would be concerned with these types of things. And in post-World War II, Stroop's talking about the matter of, does a Christian have to be a full-fledged pacifist and avoid any connection to carnal warfare, or, as some brethren, must the Christian endorse the government and engage in warfare? And now, Stroop thinks, and by the way, I'm just gathering this based on the way I think that he's writing this. I think Stroop is a pacifist. I searched high and low. I looked for articles. I looked for things to try to see if Stroop was a pacifist. But by the way he writes this section of his book on pages 12 and 13, and the way he writes what he writes on pages 18 and 19, leads me to believe that Stroop is a pacifist. All right? And he's a strong pacifist. As a matter of fact, he thinks that's what the Bible teaches. And so I think there's some areas, and particularly in this one, where Stroop takes a hard position on a matter that the Bible doesn't take a position on. And then he lumps some of these together on the bottom of page 13. All right? On the bottom of page 13. Now, I think the Bible allows for matters of conscience in the matter of carnal warfare. I don't think the Bible determines, I don't think the New Testament gives us clear, unequivocal teaching on every single matter. As a matter of fact, I know it doesn't. On every single matter that a Christian has to make a decision about. Carnal warfare is one of them. There were a lot of faithful Christians who joined the armed services in World War II and fought for our country. Right? And I would never presume, no matter what my position is, I would never presume that they were unfaithful based on their participation in military service. My grandpa Burleson got an exemption from the war because he was the oldest and he was handling the family farm. Of course, the government made exemptions, in times of war, especially, if you got to feed people. You don't take all your farmers out of the fields and leave your farms behind. But he had two brothers. My grandpa had two brothers, my Uncle John and my Uncle Hugh, who were conscientious objectors. They didn't feel like they could take up arms and take somebody's life over that matter. But they volunteered as field medics. I mean, they were in live fire situation, for a long time, out on the front lines. In fact, one of them had to lay down and play dead for over 24 hours because things hadn't gone well. And he had to lay still on the ground for over 24 hours to keep from being killed or captured. Now, they didn't take up arms, but they helped how they could with the war effort. But then there were others who were conscientious objectors who thought, man, you can't have any part in this whatsoever. You can't even buy the stamps and all those things that people did. Collect old metal. They were recycling metal back in those days. You couldn't even do that to help the war effort, even as a conscientious objector. You had to abstain from every part of carnal warfare. And I believe a person could be in any one of those positions and be a faithful Christian. I don't think Stroop believes that. I don't think he believes that. But my point is that the Bible does allow us on matters of conscience. And he lists some things here on page 13 that I found a little bit confusing because he seems to think that they're all the same. And I just want to indicate that they're not. All right? For example, he talks about the differences, bottom page 13. What part should the Christian take in civil government? Some Christians don't vote. They don't vote because they don't want any part of civil government. And they're pretty hardcore in that mindset. Now, David Lipscomb was one of those guys who wrote that Christians ought to avoid any interaction with the civil government. Now, what might have happened that would have influenced his thinking? Oh, I don't know, Civil War. And so, writing from Lipscomb writing from his perspective in the in the 1860s through the end of the 19th century, took a very anti-government position. But I don't know that he bound that as a matter of faithfulness. All right? Then we move down. What use should the Christian make of civil law? In other words, can a Christian ever take anybody to court? There are differing opinions on that. Should a Christian marry a non-Christian? I've got some pretty strong opinions on that. I think I can make a pretty good case that Christians ought to marry Christians. Matter of fact, that's what I believe. That's what I teach. That's why you don't see me do weddings for between Christians and non-Christians, because I don't think it's in the interest of the Christian to do so. All right? But I would never bind that as a matter, I would never bind that as a matter of faith. The Bible just doesn't just give us enough to say this would be a sin. For me, it would be a sin. If something happened to Rhonda, and if I ever married again, I could never marry a non-Christian. Couldn't do it because of my convictions on the matter. But if somebody else married a non-Christian, I wouldn't say. If some person married a non-Christian, I wouldn't say it was a sin. All right? Although I do think 1 Corinthians 7:39 does teach that widows and widowers ought to marry Christians.
Yeah, that's what I was fixing.
I think there's a difference.
Yeah.
Although I think Paul's going that direction, but I still think there's even some caveats even in that context. But that would be just me. All right. What constitutes just cause for divorce? What is adultery? What is murder? Now these are different matters altogether. Because the Bible does speak. The Bible does speak clearly about divorce and adultery and about murder. Is it right to dance or gamble? The Bible speaks more clearly on gambling than dancing, although I think a good case can be made against dancing with regard to lasciviousness. But, again, you're talking about, usually when we talk about dancing, we're talking about, the modern practice of such, not necessarily square dancing or things of that nature. Should a Christian attend, top page 14, should a Christian attend church regularly? How much should they give? I think the Bible speaks to the first one a whole lot more specifically than the second one. And so I think there are matters of conscience and judgment. 1 Corinthians chapter 8 teaches that. And so we want to understand that as we're thinking about this these differences and why people don't see the Bible alike, I want us to understand that even within this group on some matters, we don't all see the Bible alike. And we want to understand that this lesson, this book, and by the way, he makes this point, and we'll deal with it, Lord willing, next week, that this book is not about assigning blame or whatnot on people or religious institutions. This is about all of us learning about how to study the Bible and come to reasoned, logical, and correct conclusions about the Bible, because there are differences even in the way that we think about some things. All right, so we'll stop right there and pick up, Lord willing, next Sunday. That'll be on page 14.